Theology 223, Chapter 11, still talking about leadership. This is presentation number 4, talking about asking questions. Let me get myself out of the way here. Asking questions, open and closed-ended questions, and then the GROW model and just social media and electronic communication, which is obviously way more prevalent in our society, or is very prevalent in our society, I should say. When you start talking about asking questions and you have the concept of, you've been given one mouth and two ears for a reason, right? I mean, I jokingly say that, and that's a long-standing saying that's just been in kind of like the communication world and the coaching world. But there's some truth to that, right? You have to have the ability to understand that you can use questions as a tool to help you guide a conversation. You can use questions as a tool to help you find out more about another person. And questions have a really key component, especially if you're doing an intake like in the personal training environment. Questions matter. And questions can matter if you're a coach asking your athlete, okay, why did you break on the ball that way? Can you explain that to me? And perhaps you can get them to articulate a process that in their head was very nebulous, but they can break it down. And once we break it down, we can refine it even further. So it has its place. But questions can also be very damning, and it depends how you ask them. So it's kind of key when we start talking about, we'll see in a minute here, asking the right types of questions. And then, you start talking about this conversation where you have question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. That's a little different than having a conversation back and forth where it's question, answer. Now I have a question, you answer, and it's back and forth as opposed to one person asking other questions and the other person doing all the answers, which is more like an interrogation as opposed to a conversation. So when asking effective questions, it's a little bit more Socratic, right? You're trying to put yourself in a position where you're guiding the conversation, and you're not just having this where you're managing the conversation and having didactic lectures and it's just one person talking and everybody else is listening. In a way, you're providing like this kind of conversation stewardship when you're with your athletes, because you're guiding the conversation and you're using questions to drive them towards the answer. And many times it's the very answer you want them to give, because it's a teachable point or it's a learning moment for that athlete. And what you're doing is guiding the conversation towards, okay, you did this. I understand why you did that, but can you tell me why you would do that instead of this? And then you have these questions that you use to kind of like go back and forth towards what might be your final answer or outcome in terms of, okay, great. Now, when you do that, how can you implement that into our team strategy of doing this, this, and this when we're on the basketball court? So it's a tool to get you to the end. It's a means to an end. And what happens with this is when you start using effective questions, and I love this, is it really places the onus, of learning on the person who's the recipient, because you're asking questions and you're using those questions to get a response and create a dialogue between you and your athlete to help them learn why it is you're driving a technique pointer home or a particular task, because it fits a much bigger picture in terms of team goals. Now, I like how they kind of go through these down here, and in terms of how it requires a greater degree of cognitive ability to think through an answer. It increases awareness and understanding of the topic or situation, which I also really like. So I like these answers here, I really do. And if I remember correctly, you see them somewhere else down the road. So I would take a moment to read through those. The book breaks these out into closed-end and open-ended questions, and it's very simple. When you start talking about like closed-end questions versus open-end questions, closed are very much like yes or no, and then open-end require greater detail. And I just did this in one of my other classes where I asked the students to talk with each other, and the first question I had them ask is, what is your favorite color? My favorite color is purple. Well, that's a closed-end question because it's one word answer, right? So it's not a yes or a no, but still a very binary one-word answer. And then the next question you follow up with is, why do you like the color purple? And that's no longer a yes or a no or a single word answer. It becomes something that's more about opinion. I like the color purple because it reminds me of my time when I was at UW Whitewater and I played sports there. Cool. So tell me a little bit more about then, like when you were playing sports at Whitewater and purple, et cetera, and you start to make it more emotional as opposed to binary. So you can think of it like on a continuum where one end is very yes or no, very binary oriented, and the other one allows more extemporaneous responses where the person can talk more and articulate more about the reason why they like the color purple. You can also use leading questions, and leading questions have their place, but what you don't want to have is a leading question like a leading question after leading question after leading question. Oh, it's a really nice night out, isn't it? Well, yes, it is. Well, the sun really was hot today, wasn't it? And you're kind of asking these questions after a statement and you're imparting your opinion on the answer even before the other person gets a chance to offer their answer. So I would leave leading questions kind of by the wayside, and I'd try to practice more about open-ended and closed-ended questions in terms of the context of working with athletes or even talking with other people. So the GROW model, they outline the GROW model, goal questions, reality questions, option questions, and will questions. And so what would you like to get out of this meeting? That's a goal question. What would you like to achieve? That's a goal. Reality questions. What have you tried so far? What have you seen others do to accomplish this goal? Those are great questions you ask somebody if you're sitting down with your athlete looking at the next season, or you're sitting down with a personal training client and you want to find out more about how you can have them create a better vision for their goal. Option questions. Okay, so what could you do to make that goal happen or achieve that goal? And then what strategies would appeal to you most to put you on a path to achieve that goal? Okay, so now you're asking the other person their opinion, which is great because now you're forcing them to think about and come up with an answer, but also you're starting to put them in that place. You're starting to put them and get them to wrap themselves around what that path might look like as they work towards their goal. And then will questions, meaning like how willing are you? Which of the things have we discussed will you try? Do you want to try doing more cardio? Do you want to try doing more strength? Do you want to try doing more classes? And then, as a result of this meeting, what can I expect to see differently next week? That's an expectation or outcome, and it's an accountability type of question as well. I mean, I've had these kind of conversations with my clients 1,000 times over the years, and I can tell you it's something where you have the ability to set the expectation on the front end and then you implement it later on. It's very powerful. I'll explain this here in 1 second. So it's not only that effective communication just involves storytelling, or telling or sending messages, excuse me. It includes some effective listening as well, right? And you have to be able to ask good questions, but you have to be able to ask the combination of good open-ended and closed-ended questions to be able to navigate a conversation and set expectation with your clients or your physical therapy patient or your athletes or whoever it may be. And they list just a ton of messages when you start talking about sending clear messages to people. And they start off with, be direct. And I think it's like a page or a column and a half of information. So I would take the time to look on page 253. I'm not going to bore you with it here. And they list the 6 C's on 254 as an example of kind of a way to encapsulate many of the points that are in communication. It has to be clear, it has to be concise, it has to be courteous, it has to be correct, it has to be complete, and it has to be constructive. I like these as a rule of thumb. And what you'll find is, as a coach, because of the relationship you have with your athletes, you almost can't help but fall into this process or any one of those C's. You got to deliver clear message. It has to be concise and to the point. You can't labor on for a half an hour when you're trying to get a technique pointer out. You don't have to be mean about it. You can be nice and courteous, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, just imagine, like, even from an athletic standpoint, if you're an athlete now, think of ways that you're receiving information from your coaches and how many hit any of these 6 C's. Some probably more, some probably less. With electronic communication, you talk about increasing brand through an NIL deal, and you talk about just bolstering your brand, maybe as a personal trainer or physical therapist. And you got to be ready, and you got to be prepared to deal with what might be the good part of it as you kind of create your own brand and push yourself out there. And you got plenty of keyboard warriors out there who will be more than happy to just try to tamp you down. And I would throw this out in terms of, if you're a coach, how much control should there be over social media for your athletes? They have their own agency. They are their own people. If they want to have their own social media, they can do that. And it's more ubiquitous now for sure than it was obviously when I was an athlete. But social media has the ability to really just destroy the confidence of an athlete. And I would urge you to really take a hard look at how much you want to police this. And in some regards, ask your question, how much legally can you actually police this? I would say you're kind of limited, but you can set some policies in place and maybe have clinics or seminars for your athletes to find ways to manage or process some of the negativity that they are certain to receive, as an athlete posting on social media. And as you go through this, it has a triggering capability, right? You could have an athlete who reads something about their skill or their ability, and all of a sudden it just destroys their confidence and they have a terrible race. And that can most definitely happen. So I think, the athletic departments, I agree with this, they have to be proactive in helping the student athletes. It's a way where you're working on creating your own brand. You got to be strategic about it. You have to be able to respond to people who are keyboard warriors, but do so in a way that doesn't destroy your own brand or maybe compromise any kind of rules of integrity that you have being a part of the athletic program. And I would urge any coach out there to spend some part of their practice time, some part of their prep time during the preseason, off-season, or in-season directly towards electronic communication and some of the pitfalls that can happen as a result of having a social media presence. All right, guys, thank you so much. On to the next presentation.